Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Greetings and good day to everyone. Culture opens the sense of beauty, and the beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. Every man's ability is strengthened by his culture. On the behalf of the Department of English, I extend my warm greetings and hearty welcome to everyone gathered here for the value added course on local trends and challenges in exploring cultures. Prayer is man's greatest power. Prayer is the greatest of all forces because it honors God and brings him into activate. And now, to invoke the presence of God, may I invite our department choir to lead us in the prayer. May I request everyone to stand for the prayer song.
Everyone needs compassion, a love that's never fading. Let mercy fall on me. Everyone needs forgiveness, the kindness of the Savior, the hope of nations. Savior, He can move mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author and salvation. Heroes in comfort. Jesus comfort. Take me as you find me, all my fears and failures, and fill my life again. I give my life to follow everything I believe in. And now, sing, He can sing. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author and salvation. Heroes in comfort. Jesus.
Thank you, choir. Students, kindly be seated.
As the greatest dramatist himself writes in the Comedy of Errors, small cheer and great welcome makes a merry feast. May I call upon Miss Shantini of 2nd MA English to deliver the welcome address.
Pleasant morning, everyone. I'm V. Shantini Devi of 2nd MA English Aided is here to welcome each and everyone to the valuation of the value-added course on Glocal trends and challenges in exploring cultures organized by the Department of English, Bishop Iber College, Trichy. I feel privileged to welcome our resource person for the first session, Dr. Mary Gabriel, Assistant Professor of English from Auxilium College Autonomous, Vellore. We welcome you, ma'am. And our esteemed resource person for the second session, Dr. Saradindu Bhattacharya, Assistant Professor, Department of English from University of Hyderabad. We welcome you, sir, in absentia. He will join for the second session. I also welcome our beloved principal, Dr. T. Pal Dayabrin, Vice Principal of Aided Stream, Mr. A. Alagappa Moses, and Vice Principal of the Self-Finance Stream, Dr. Satya Seelan JGR in absentia. I would also like to welcome our incredible force behind everything we do, our head of the department, Dr. S. Shobana. and our UG head, Dean of Research and Development, Dr. Suresh Frederick Sir, and our evening shift coordinator and Dean of Training and Placement, Dr. C. Dhanapal Sir. In absentia, I would also like to welcome our beloved class teachers, Dr. G. Parvati and Dr. Ruth Rajati. I'm also pleased to greet our instructors of the course for steering us on the subject through the duration of the course and all our faculty members of the department. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome our student friends for their enthusiasm with regards to learning a new concept. I also welcome everyone who have joined us online. Thank you.
Thank you, Shantini.
It is the attribute of an erudite person to share his knowledge and experience. We have one such ignited mind amidst us. Now I request Ms. Aishwarya of 2nd MA English to introduce the resource person, Dr. Mary Gabriel, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Auxilium College, Vellore.
There is no limit to what we, as women, can accomplish, said Michelle Obama. I'm happy to introduce the resource person of the session, Dr. Mary Gabriel, Assistant Professor, Auxilium College, Vellore. She is a woman of virtue and simplicity. She is a living inspiration to the young ones. We are so lucky that she really found a way to be with us today, despite the distance and hectic schedule. She is an assistant professor with a teaching experience of over 15 years. She is specialized in cultural studies, memory studies, and linguistics. She has presented 5 papers in national and international conference, and she is a chairperson of the PG board for MA English in Tiruvallur University. I feel great honor in introducing to you Dr. Mary Gabriel, who is our guest of today's webinar. Welcome, ma'am. So, with huge applause, may I please call upon Dr. Mary Gabriel, ma'am, on the floor to get an opportunity for all of us to listen such personality. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for those wonderful words of welcome and that generous words of introduction. Am I audible, friends?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah. So, it's indeed a great honor that I'm addressing students of a very prestigious institution that has a great heritage in higher education in India as well as in Tamil Nadu. And looking at the hall that you all are seated, I'm getting nostalgic about a conference that I attended back in 2008, I think, when Professor Roop Kumar Bala Singh headed the department. And it's such a pleasure, no, to see you sitting in the same auditorium where I listened to some of the inspiring lectures of my profession and research life. It's really interesting that you are doing a value-added course on culture, because cultural studies is something that is very complex to understand, leave alone doing a course on it. And to be doing a course in cultural studies is really commendable. And I'm sure Bishop Heber and the Department of English, Bishop Heber, must be one of the few institutions that has dared to give a course in cultural studies, because cultural studies as a discipline is very dynamic. Okay, you don't have a set curricula, you don't have fixed frameworks and research tools to work with. It keeps changing. It's a very dynamic field. And to be having a course is really a commendable aspect of your college. And I want to appreciate the department. And I thank Dr. Parvati for inviting me to be with you all and to share whatever I know. And so far as my area of today's talk, I'm as much as a learner as you are. I wouldn't prefer to call myself an expert, because in India, food studies is a very new area of study, and you hardly have any critics or theorists writing about it. And it's indeed my pleasure to be with you. Today, it's a learning experience to you as well as to me. Okay. So without further ado, I think I can start my presentation. I'll share my screen you please let me know if, I think the host has disabled the participants from screen sharing. Can you enable that option, please? Screen sharing option?
Just a moment, ma'am.
Sure, sure. So before that gets done, I would like to know how many of you had your breakfast this morning, since we are going to talk about food. How many of you have had your breakfast? Please put up your hands. Okay. That's not even, that's nice, sir. That's half the participants. What about the remaining half?
Ma'am, you can start sharing your screen, ma'am. We are
Yeah.
ready.
You should be able to see PPT. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am. Your PowerPoint is visible.
Yeah. Now just tell me if I'm able to move to the next slide. Do you
Yes.
see this? Yeah. Okay. Is it back to the first slide now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So what's your name, ma? So that I can get back to you if I need any.
Rizwana.
Pardon?
Rizwana.
Yes, Rizwana. So I'm banking on you to get any feedback on how the screen looks over there. Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So let's first look at the title of my presentation. We will decode this first and then move on to the actual subject of our discussion. So food as a cultural idiom, that's going to be our perspective today. Where is food a cultural idiom in contemporary discourse? So if you were to throw light on this, how food is related with culture, you can see that there is this relationship between food and culture is two-way. It's not that food is a sub-branch of culture. Food and culture influence each other. And that is the reason why food is spoken of as a cultural idiom in contemporary discourse. What do we mean by discourse? Any form of human expression, all forms of representations, and all expression of ideas can be called a discourse. And in the contemporary discourse, any discourse related to culture has food as a very important element. And why? That's what we're going to discuss. And so far as the relationship between cultural studies and food studies is concerned, they both are centered on evaluation of society. When it comes to cultural studies, you don't see that cultural studies scholars just attempting to examine cultural practices just like that. When they look at cultural practices, they look through the cultural practices into the society that is having such and such a practice. The same goes good for food studies as well. In food studies, you see when food is studied in terms of how a community produces food, distributes food, consumes food, markets food, values food, in all these aspects, you will see that food studies will be able to evaluate the standards, values, and the belief systems of that particular society. So this way, cultural studies and food studies share a common framework, be it for study, be it for research. You see cultural studies and food studies share certain common frameworks. That is the reason why they are both related, because they are both centered on evaluation of the society. And in what other ways culture related to food studies, cultural studies related to food studies? They both engage in political affiliations. When you look at a cultural practice, a cultural studies scholar will definitely look into the belief system, the ideas, the value system, the ideologies that is propagated through that particular cultural practice. The same goes both for food studies as well. In the course of our presentation, we will be exploring more about what is the relationship between political engagement and food studies. Now, if you were to track the trajectory of food as and how it was studied by scholars from different branches, it could be anthropology, it could be nutrition, it could be culinary science, it could be medical science, it could be from the perspective of history, society. If you were to study food, you get through these different um, different stages, where food had been an important element. Right in the beginning of human evolution, you see food was only related with sustenance. People ate food to be alive. Pardon? I hear somebody interrupting. Okay. Yeah. Can I proceed? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you were to trace the trajectory of how food had played a role in human life and human culture, you see that it started with the aspect of sustenance. Food meant a source of living, a source of existence. And you see, slowly human beings move towards a phase where they look at food in terms of nutrition, where they look at food as something that has nutritive value and that will give them some powers to do something or to excel in something. And then when man starts practicing agriculture, you see food slowly becoming an occupation. And from there, after man masters producing food, earlier he was gathering food and then he started producing food. Now, food and production gave way to what we call the economy, the economic aspect of food. Who gets to eat what in which part of the country or in which part of the world is decided by a lot of institutions. It could be by the government, it could be by, but it is never by the farmers and the consumers. So what plays behind what is planted, what is grown, what is distributed, all these depend on the economy or the person who has the power to operate the economy of that particular society. And if economy is related, then automatically the socio-cultural aspects of food also come in. Culture plays a lot of role in how a society or a community eats, what it eats, how it eats, and why it eats a particular kind of food. Now, this is exactly how food studies scholars would begin with their study on food. Okay, if you were to trace the trajectory of a particular food in a place, if you're studying how a particular food product came to be used in a particular place and why, what are its origins, how did it change, who produces them, who consumes them, why do they produce this particular crop here, who consumes it, how do they consume it, all these aspects are related to food studies. And one important aspect within the framework of cultural studies is that food becomes a critical sense. When you study the food of a community, you get to study the life and culture of that community, of that community of people. So food becomes a critical lens also. Just like you have post-colonialism, Marxism, or feminism, food studies also becomes a lens through which you can analyze a society. And in most cases, you will see that food becomes a critical lens because it analyzes power relations and structures of dominance, very much like cultural studies. What do we mean by power relations? What do we mean by structures of dominance? So in order to understand this, we need to have a look at these pictures. Do you recognize these posters? You should be.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So they are both two different versions of a movie. One is a Malayalam movie and the other is a Tamil movie. The Tamil movie was released recently, and you see how these movies, they address a particular issue of power in a family, and how is this issue addressed? Through food, is it not? So you see, the poster of the Tamil movie is very significant because you see the protagonist of the movie standing behind a window, and it looks less a window and more a prison, doesn't it? Do you agree? Yeah. Why? Because when you speak about food in a household like the household that is depicted in these two movies, you always see a woman located in a space which we call the kitchen, and this space itself is gendered. What is the meaning of gendering a space? You take a space and attribute that space with certain qualities, and you stigmatize that place and say that this place belongs to this person. That's her place. She has to be there 24/7. She has to take care of all the jobs that concerns. Do you overhear the prayer of the intercom in our college here?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it disturbing you? Or should we pause till the prayer gets over?
You can proceed.
Yes. If you want me to pause, you let me know. Okay. So you see, this poster is very important because you see the window bars looking like prison bars, where you get a look at how the space called kitchen is projected by this particular filmmaker. And if you have seen the movie, you would have come to know that the movie is about the voice of a housewife who is given a role of preparing food for the entire family, and how in every aspect of how the food is prepared, distributed, or served and consumed, you see the film is actually addressing power relations in the house. If you have seen the trailer, you would have come to know that the father-in-law in the house, he prefers the chutney to be ground in the stone pestle, or what we call ammikal, okay? Which involves a lot of labor, is it not? And he associates the chutney ground in the stone grinder with a particular taste. And he says, if you grind the chutney in the stone grinder, it's tasty, and that's what I like. I happen to be the head of the family, and I decide how the chutney should get ground for breakfast every day. And you will see the mother-in-law in the movie telling the daughter-in-law who likes which food how. So the responsibility of the person in the space called kitchen is vested with a lot of power relations. She never gets to decide what to cook and how to cook and when to cook, although a maximum of labor and time is contributed by her. And that's exactly why this particular poster is deliberately designed to look like a prison. So one aspect of food studies is to address the power relations that are involved in the dynamics of how food is produced, food is distributed, and food is consumed. And you also see that food studies also addresses how domination is structured. What is the meaning of dominance? one member or one person enslaving or controlling another person. That is what is meant by dominance. And dominance operates in a structure like a family. Now, this structure is a family structure, and that the poster on your to your left adequately depicts how the bride looks so happy on the day of her wedding. That's actually the photograph of the wedding that will be nailed to the wall in that particular house. So structures like marriage and family, they engage in operating the production of food and distribution of food and consumption of food in a pattern that gives way to, or that enables the power relations as and how they exist in a structure like this. Let's move on to another slide. This is actually a picture from a restaurant, okay? It's a very famous franchised restaurant. It's a veg restaurant where I happen to see this poster about what is a laddu, okay? And again, in food studies, history is a very important element where you see scholars studying the history of a particular food. Now, if you take chili, chili had never been part of Indian cuisine. If you were to look into the history of chili in Indian cuisine, you will see that chili actually came after the Portuguese expansion, the Portuguese colonial expansion in India. Up until that time, Indians are used to using pepper, black pepper in their cuisine for spice. And you see how most restaurants, especially these chain of restaurants you see, they focus on how they try to market their product on displays like these, where they give you information about the history of food in terms of its heritage, and they also marketing the product in advertising the product being as traditional, as with rich heritage as what you see in the historical origins of that particular food. Now, what caught my attention in this poster is one particular line, but I will give you a few minutes to go through what is written here. If the screen is too far, for those of you who are seated at the back, I will read it. It's the edible commodity is laddu. Okay, laddu is an omnipresent sweet, which means you can find laddu anywhere. It is referred in olden days as Nariyal Nakru in South. Maybe he is referring to Andhra. It dates back to the time of the Chola Empire, when it was a sweet that was packed for travelers and warriors as a symbol of good luck for their expeditions. Yet, another variety is the fox millet laddus, which is the prasadam at the Lord Muruga temple today. Interestingly, maybe he's referring to Thinai laddu, if I'm right. Interestingly, the origin of the laddu was more because of the medicinal properties that the ingredients used offered than as a sweet. It is said that these laddus were given to teenage girls to keep their raging hormones under check. In fact, treatment and not indulgence was what led to the discovery of some of the popular laddus, including methi, makhana, and so on. So you see there are three different aspects to it. Laddu stands for prosperity, good luck. And then there's one critical point here where laddu is given to teenage girls to keep their raging hormones under check. Now, this particular aspect of how you look at food and how you propagate a particular edible commodity should catch your eye. If you're a food studies scholar, you should look at this. Now, this particular line of how laddu is meant to keep the raging hormones of girls under check. There is a presumption that hormones are raging only for girls. if you ask a scientist, hormones is very human, and you cannot gender hormones. You can never say that male does not have the hormones, females do. You can never say that, can you? No, because hormones have a different purpose and function in our body. But look at the way this edible commodity is propagated by this particular restaurant, where they say that it is meant to keep the raging hormones under check. The word check is very important because it is trying to exercise some sort of a control over the biological system of a gender that is othered here. Only if you treat the female gender as the other, you try to control, right? So keeping the raging hormones of teenage girls under check becomes a value to this particular product, where there'll be people who will be thinking, oh my God, laddus are really fantastic. And look at the benefits that they offer, that they keep the hormones of teenage girls under check. So there are a lot of presumptions there where you stereotype a particular gender, and you also offer an option or a possibility to keep that hormone under check. So if you feed a girl with laddu, her hormones are under check. You can restrain, you can control. So the idea of control again goes back to power relations and structures of dominance. So laddu is not simply laddu, but the way it is propagated as a product. And you also see how people gender a product in relation to an othered gender. Okay. And this again is a very important, can you identify the dish to your right and the restaurant to your left? Have you heard of it before? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. What do you see?
Sambar.
Uh,
Salam.
yeah. To me, it looks like paneer butter masala with the drizzle of the cream. Okay, whatever. Yes. Anybody else? Pardon?
Paneer butter masala, ma'am.
Paneer butter masala. Very good. Okay. Can you relate the pictures on the left and right? And can you tell me what's common between the both?
Ma'am, the word balti means bucket, and the traditional way of serving any kind of curries in restaurant. So it is a symbolic way where the restaurant says that we serve traditional food in a traditional way or something like that.
Very good. What's your name?
Sam Daniel, ma'am.
That's a very good answer, Sam. Thank you. Okay. What Sam says is right. The name of the restaurant is actually referring to the container in which that particular dish is served. Now, there's a small history to this particular relationship between the restaurant and the receptacle in which the dish is served. This is actually a picture from London, where in the 1950s, after India became independent, a lot of Indian settlers happened to open restaurants, and they served Indian food. Okay. What they had in mind was, they thought they will serve Indian migrants from India, and they will be their customers. And bucket uh, is not originally used to serve food. The purpose of bucket is to have it, you use it to draw water from the well, is it not? But because of the handle of the balti means bucket, because of the handle of the balti, it's easier to carry it around the restaurant and serve the dish to people who are eating. So because the bucket became a very important icon of restaurants of the post-colonial London, you see that Balti became a very important icon. Again, the study of sign or the relationship between food studies and semiotics is also very crucial here. Okay. So a receptacle that was used to draw water has now become a sign that is associated with restaurants that is meant only for migrants from India in London. And because, people call all types of side dish that we use as curry in London, in West generally, you know that they use curry for everything. Sambar is curry to them, paneer butter masala is curry to them, chicken curry is curry to them. So everything is curry to them. Anything you have as a side is a curry to them. And they don't distinguish between Rogan Josh and paneer butter masala. They don't distinguish between butter chicken and paneer butter masala. To them, everything is curry. Okay. And because curry was from the third world country, they always had a class distinction, no, between the food that was meant for the British and the food that was meant for the migrants and the working class British people. So when these Indian restaurants opened up in London, you will never see an upper class white British person going to these restaurants. So they would avoid everything that is associated with the word Balti. So Balti restaurants are too low for them. They would look down on it. Okay. But things changed after the 1970s, because up until 1970s, you see that Balti chicken or Balti restaurants are places where only migrants from the third world countries eat, or the working class whites eat. So you see the restaurant as well as the receptacle that is used to serve dishes there is labeled with a particular class. So you say it's meant for a particular class. Balti restaurant or Balti chicken or Balti curry is meant for the working class British or for the migrants. So who are like, so there is a class based divide between who eats at Balti restaurants and who does not. Okay. And the same thing goes good for the other side of the line, where you will never expect an Indian, a third world Indian, a third world migrant will never get into restaurants that are meant for privileged whites. So you see this divide here in terms of food. So this again is an issue where food becomes an important element to study the power structures and structures of dominance. Now, this again is an important issue. No, what do you see here? Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this poster, or what is this poster about? What do you see on this poster? I can't hear you. Somebody's talking. No. Okay.
The shop is selling like the
Meat.
meat.
Yeah. 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 Is everything okay with the poster?
Ma'am, those are actually assigned different caste names and different community names. For example,
Very,
cut,
yeah.
Mr. Banerjee's cut for fishes. It is actually stereotyping the regions of India.
Yeah, very good, very good. That is Sam again?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, very good, Sam. Now, this is an offer by an outlet that sells meat, okay? And the offer is called early goat offer, which means that you have to pre-book your meat so that you get it on offer. But the problem with this is the offer is trying to attract customers with casteist labels. So you can see that Mrs. Patil's cut for mutton, then Mrs. Shetty's cut for fish, and Banerjee, Reddy, George. You can also see George. It is not just casteist, it is also sexist. Do you see that? Because all the casteist surnames come with the suffix Mrs. and not Mr. Can you see that? So when you refer to a particular division in the society, and when you claim that this food product is for this particular community in the society, and not just this particular community, this gender from that community. So a poster like this is not just casteist, it is also sexist. This goes back to how a space as kitchen is then gendered, right? When you claim that it's meant for the woman in the house, when you claim that it's the woman's place, and when you claim that it's the woman's job to get the food cooked in a particular way at a particular time, you are actually gendering the place. So food studies also addresses this casteist divisions as well as sexist predilections of statements like these. We have some more posters. These are old vintage ads. What do you see there? The captions are more important on these posters. Can anyone tell me what you think about this? Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning.
Myself, I'm Santosh.
Yes, Santosh.
The very first one says a ready solution to housewives' entertainment problems, unmatched quality.
Yeah.
Itself is sexist and is very clearly given to the mothers.
Yeah.
And it is also a sarcastic comment. So that's the first one, ma'am. And they've also used a picture of a mother entertaining their children by giving this juice.
Very good. Very good, Santosh. And I would like to add to what Santosh has said. Look at the captions on top. The pampered favorite of pampered palates. So pampering is associated with children. And when a food product is marketed, you only have two people there. It's either the mother or the child. They get to decide what should be bought at home. Okay, yeah. The next poster.
The caption, mother who cares use dalda. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is like the prestige ad, like it says prestige eppadi venanu solluvaanga, like the housewife, it's a same thing.
மனைவியை நேசிக்கிறவங்க prestige எப்படி வேண்டாம்னு சொல்லுவாங்க.
So it is like the same thing. Mother who cares use dalda.
Yeah, very good. So here also motherhood. Yeah, somebody else had something to say. Yeah.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma. What's your name?
I'm Preeti, ma'am.
Yes, Preeti.
In the second poster, they use mother who care use dalda.
Yeah.
Always only mother who cares. Why not a dad? So
Very good. Excellent. That's a brilliant feedback. So as food studies scholars, very good, Preeti. As food studies scholars, you should not only look at what is present, you should look at what is absent, what is not there. See, for the earlier poster I told you, why is it that in any advertisement, you only have the mother and the father, sorry, mother and the child who have the power to decide what to buy for home, okay, what to buy for the house. Fathers are absent here, very good. As so fathers don't care, or fathers need not care, or it's the mother's job to care. Okay, so that is one aspect of it. And you see motherhood being capitalized here. What is capitalizing? It is exploited, it is manipulated. You know, because motherhood has got so much to do with emotions. And when an ad is being watched, the entire family gets to watch. And when an ad is propagating this idea that a mother who buys this particular drink, Noga is the name of the drink, Noga drink or Dalda, she's a mother who cares for the family. She's an ideal mother. Now, this aspect of associating motherhood with certain fixed qualities, in spite of being clear-cut economic reasons behind them, you also see how even economy bangs on how gender operates in an institution like family. So as food scholars, as food studies scholars, you should also address this. This is how you work with. This again is another ad, but it's from the West. Here it bangs on. Earlier it was mother, right? Here it's about wife. So you have an ad for Pillsbury flour, okay? That is supposed to be very good to make biscuits. So the caption goes like this. Can anyone just have a look at the caption and tell me what you feel about this? I can zoom in if you want.
My husband says he loves me only for myself, but I notice he likes me, but he likes me, my biscuit.
Likes, but my biscuits too. Okay, very good. What do you have to say about this? What's your name? Introduce yourself, please.
Rizwana, ma'am.
Rizwana again. Yes, Rizwana, what do you think about this poster?
Ma'am, it's like first the lady says the husband likes her for being herself, but second line is a irony. She says that only if she make good biscuits or if she make tasty biscuits, her husband loves her. So it's an ironical tone.
Yeah, very good. There is irony. So there are two.
I
Yeah.
want one more point, ma'am. It's like
Yeah.
only a woman who cooks well or a woman who could make good biscuits can get a place in is her husband's heart.
Yeah, very good, very good. That's what I was about to say. So the what is unsaid here is, if you want your husband to like you, you should get Pillsbury flour and make biscuits for him. Okay, so that is basically very similar to what you quoted earlier about the prestige ad. So all these are surrounding around the role of a wife to make good food, tasty food. Okay. And this again addresses gender here. Okay. Shall we proceed to the next slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Kids need the energy candy gives. Yeah. You have nothing to say?
Morning, ma'am.
Yeah, morning, ma.
I'm Preeti.
Yes, Preeti.
The last line, here's why smart mothers buy candy in cellophane.
Very good.
If the mother gives the candy, she is smart. And what about others?
That's,
So here the economy plays.
yeah, yeah, very good.
They are portraying that those who buy candies are smart mothers. So
Yeah.
kind of an economy comes in here.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So what Preeti said is absolutely right. But one thing that you must understand here is this is how sugar was marketed. See, if you were to take how sugar is looked upon today. You see, people keep talking about how white sugar is very bad for your health. But this was the time when sugar was marketed as a very important product that you need to have. That's the reason why the word need is underlined there. Can you see that? So it's something it's something that you cannot live with live without. You need it. Okay, there is no other go. Very similar to what this dalda ad says. Today, hydrogenated oil is considered to be very bad for your liver and your gut health. But then you see people propagating dalda as a very good product. There's another one that again talks about how sugar keeps your energy up and your appetite down. So if you don't have time to eat, what do? You eat something with sugar. So this again is a method of how people propagated sugar. Okay, even though now we recognize how harmful it is. One important detail about this poster. Does anyone else see anything else other than sugar?
It says diet tips.
Yeah, diet tip. Yeah, that's nice. Anything else?
There is a black woman eating a cookie.
Very good, Santosh. Very good. So having a black model to propagate sugar, propagate a product as sugar is clearly meant to attract black buyers. So it is specifically to cover up black buyers, and the product is aiming to get more consumers from the black society to get to eat the biscuits. Okay, so that's a very good feedback. Now, this is exactly how food studies approaches power relations. So it's not just food. So in all the posters that we saw just now, you see gender is addressed there. Communal divide is addressed there. So when beef eating became a very important issue, a very crucial issue, when people were killed for eating beef, you know there is a communal reason that was propagated behind that. And you see there's class playing an important role here. Casteist divides play an important role about who gets to eat beef and who doesn't, and why. Then you see economy plays an important role. Capitalism, globalization, colonialism. So when you talk about globalization, it's not actually globalization in terms of food and drink. Take, for example, the way Coke, McDonald's, or KFC is being served all over the world. You have the franchises in all corners of the world. Do you think it's globalization? Can you expect an African brand making this? Can you expect an Indian brand making this? You can only call it Americanization, not globalization. Okay, so it's basically to do with how America is trying to capitalize the food market all over the world. And this is again addressed in food studies. And now we come down to what concerns us as literature students. What's the role of food in literature? And food and literature have a very important connection. And you see writers drawing the attention of the readers to elements of food or issues around food in the fiction that they write. And recently, a lot of novels uh, uh, were focused on food alone. Okay, the major part of the novel was about that. You see, Julia Child is an important work. Then, Like Water for Chocolate. Then, The Kitchen Daughter. These are just samples of the fiction that are focused on food. There are many more writers who write on food. I'd like to talk about this third novel, Kitchen Daughter, where you see writers these days banking on or borrowing uh, food both for their narrative as well as for their style. So if you take this novel, you see there's a character called Jeannie. Okay. What happens to Jeannie is she loses her parents in an accident. And in order to get over the grief of the loss, what she does is she goes to the kitchen, takes out a recipe, which is written in a card, handwritten by her grandmother. And she starts making that recipe because to her, cooking is like a therapy. As she starts making the soup, she could see her grandmother coming alive. That is the ghost of the grandmother sitting on a stool in the kitchen. She's terrified at the beginning, but then you see the grandmother talking, and slowly the image of the grandmother will fade out. And she later finds out that when you cook a recipe handwritten by a person who is no more, who is dead, the way you cook, and when the dish is getting cooked, and when the aroma of the dish sort of fills the kitchen, you see the ghost of that person appearing. And she has conversation with a lot of people who are no more in her life. And that way she reconciles with her past and present, and that's how the novel goes. So what caught my attention in this novel is you see how writers borrow a lot of devices to write their work from food. Okay, where you see the metaphors that writers use, in this particular novel, you will see the narrator Jeannie. She can only think of food metaphors when she is with people, when she is telling herself how she feels about this person or that person. She can only think in terms of food. I have put some examples over there. It's Amanda's voice. She has a voice like orange juice, sweet but sharp. So she cannot think of other metaphors than food. No, so here food becomes a literary device for writers. Okay, and then you see how writers also bank on how food is related with memory. So memory studies is an upcoming branch as like food studies, and you see they both correlate in the way food and memory uh, uh, cross cut. Okay, and you see there's a quote from the novel. We had her birthday 2 weeks ago, right before they left. She made her own cake. She always did red velvet cake. So here she's talking about food, but then it is related to the memory of her mother's birthday. And it's not just for devices like metaphors, it's also used as a stylistic device by writers. Okay. So you see how in this particular novel, the writer will always use very short sentences that you would normally see in a recipe. How would you write a recipe? Wash and dry the kale, slice out each rib, cut the leaves in thin ribbons. You see how short these sentences are. You will see the same style of writing used in how the character talks to herself. Same short sentences, which will sound like a recipe. What you see to your left is bad things come in threes. My father dies, my mother dies. Then there's the funeral, which sounds very much like wash and dry the kale, slice out each rib, cut the leaves in thin ribbons, drop, stir, square of cubes. So there is no distinction here about which is a record of a life or which is a recipe. And this again is a very important aspect of how food happens to be an important element in writing. Then people are also attempting a lot of experimental writing. You see people writing recipe fiction these days, fiction in the form of recipe. You may be familiar with epistolary novel, right? What is an epistolary novel? A novel, yeah?
Which is letter, like a letter.
Yeah, a story told through letters. Okay, and recipe fiction is something like that, where you see recipes telling you the story. Okay, every recipe will have a story. And there are family recipes too. Yes, Rizwana has something to say.
Yes, ma'am. Anita Nayar's alphabet soup comes under recipe.
Yeah, very good, very good. So people are experimenting a lot on ideas like recipe fiction. And then you also see people writing on food and memory, how memory is very closely related with food, the taste of the food, the smell of the food, or any aspect of the food will definitely strike a memory. And people, especially these days, a lot of quantitative research is going on how food can have positive impact on patients who suffer from memory issues like Alzheimer's. There are so many psychotic disorders, right, that are related to the memory of the patient. Those disorders are curable through food. That's so many researches are going on how food and memory is related. And you see writers writing on that, where you have a character suffering from memory loss, and you will see that character getting it back because of some food. Either she tries cooking or she tastes. Okay. And food and heritage also is a very important aspect in writing, both in research as well as literature. And people are talking about food and nationalism, food and migration. All the issues we spoke about, Balti chicken, is so much to do with nationalism, right? And it also has got to do with migration, where diaspora writing banks so much on food and nationalism. You must be familiar with Chitra Banerjee's Mistress of Spices, no? Where she talks about spices having therapeutic value. No, they even solve problems in the families. So all this is to do with food and diaspora. Okay. And in research also, you see food plays an important role. Food studies plays an important role in terms of history, culture, culinary science, medical science, food and gender, all that we discussed so far. Food and race, food and ethnicity, that is an important aspect of food related research. And I would like to draw your attention to this particular research. It's a proper scientific research, quantitative research, that was attempted by a group of researchers in California. And they happened to see that food had a lot of positive psychosocial outcomes. They attempt this on cancer patients and people who suffer from memory related disorders like Alzheimer's, where you see the patients who are taken as sample study for the research, they are given assignments to cook. They can choose baking, or they can choose what is known as community cooking, where they cook together. So in all this, you see, I would like to read the outcome of the research there. 2 research studies reported changes in confidence or the self-esteem, and as a result of participation in structured interventions. In semi-structured qualitative interviews, patients with mental health, they participated in unit-based baking classes, and they happened to report that it increased their concentration, coordination, and confidence. So it's not just about cooking. It's not just about food. It's also about cooking and the way you relate with the other human through cooking. Okay. So these are some of the outcomes which I would like to read line by line, but I can see that we're already 15 minutes past. Okay. Now, these, if you are going to begin to master food studies, what are the things that you should be reading? Who are the critics that you should resort to? Okay, that's the list I have given here. Roland Barthes' Mythologies is a very important book, where Roland Barthes addresses all these aspects of food, these aspects that we covered, right? The communal divide, the economy, the capitalism, globalization, colonialism, all these are covered by Roland Barthes in his mythologies. And there's another beautiful book called Marion Nessel's Food Politics. When people talk about nutrition and health, how people put forth a particular belief system. See, when somebody tells you beef eating is wrong, it pollutes your health, that is a political engagement behind who says it and why they say it. Okay. And there is a recent book by Geetanjali Shahani called Food and Literature, which is a very important book and a very good book also. I happen to read a few chapters from there, where it relates between food and literature. Okay. And then the theorists that you can look into, no, if you are looking to do research on food studies: Pierre Bourdieu, Jack Goody, Sidney Mintz, Arjun Appadurai, and Nicola Humble. Arjun Appadurai is a key theorist here, who has contributed hugely to study food and nationalism. Okay, I think I should stop here. If you have anything to ask me, you can do so. Otherwise, we can wind up. Do we have questions?
We have a couple of questions, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Now the session is open for questions and interaction. Audience can
Yes.
put your questions.
So there are no questions?
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
I'm Ludi Susan.
Yes, Susan.
Okay. You said that cultural studies and food studies have common framework and similarities, right? Comparing with the old days, we have a lot of changes in the both studies. So what's your view and opinion on that, ma'am? We have different food style and lifestyle too. So what's your view?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question actually. For so many problems that we face today in terms of malnutrition, in terms of increase in mental disorders, in terms of you see, these days depression also is becoming huge. We have hardly heard of depression in India, but you see people talking about depression as a very common disorder in India too. Actually, food has an important role to play in how we can overcome such disorders. There are a lot of things that comes into how food is cooked at home, how is it eaten. If you all remember that movie called Kaka Mutta, have you seen that movie Kaka Mutta? There's a scene at the end of the movie where you will see throughout the movie you see the boys, showing a lot of fascination for pizza, and they will do everything in their might, to save up money to eat pizza and all that. But when finally it happens, when they get to eat the pizza, you see the boy saying that our Aya's dosa was so much better than pizza. It's not even near that. So it's exactly that. The way products are marketed, the way products are made visible. Visibility is very important in marketing, right? When people get to see a lot of stuff, views become very important these days. So when you market a product, visibility is what counts, and that directly leads to the changes in lifestyle. So when it comes to visibility, as food studies scholars, we should look at how we should not just view things, we should critically look at them. When you look at them critically, you will automatically uh, stop the society from ruining its traditional lifestyle and getting into a lifestyle for no reason. That could be one solution. We all of us know that the transformation is essential. We should get back to our roots. We should eat what is good for us. Any more questions?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry to inform you, ma'am, as we are running short of time, we do have
Yeah.
few questions. Can we please post those questions to your mail ID?
Sure. Please do, please. Ma'am has my email ID. Please post. I will forward my PPT also to ma'am. You can have a look at it later at your own time.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
The session has helped us to understand and explore the relationship between food and culture, political engagement and food studies, and power relations involved in food studies. Your examples, your captions, and your quotes from cinema, from advertisements and novels helped us to understand the food culture in a better way. Once again, we thank you for your insightful talk, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being such a good listeners. I thank Dr. Parvati for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, one and all. Sometime later, if we meet in person, we will talk more about this.
Sure, ma'am. Sure, very much.
Thank you.
We very much wanted to have you here in person because a lecture like this would have been much effective had you been
Yeah.
in person. But Not many a time in recent times have I seen such a very receptive audience. Thanks for your lecture, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Parvati. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We extend our hearty welcome to Dr. Sararindu Bhattacharya. Thank you so much, sir.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time to address us amidst your busy schedule. Once again, we welcome you all for the second session of Glocal Trends and Challenges in Exploring Cultures. The key to growth is introduction of higher dimensions of consciousness into awarenesses. Dr. Sararindu Bhattacharya is here with us to introduce a new dimension of knowledge. Now, may I call upon Ms. Divya K. of 2nd MA English to introduce the resource person, Dr. Sararindu Bhattacharya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, University of Hyderabad.
Good morning, everyone. I heartily welcome you all to the value-added course on Glocal Trends and Challenges in Exploring Cultures. It is my pleasure to introduce the resource person of this session, Dr. Sararindu Bhattacharya, who has graciously accepted our invitation to join us today. Dr. Bhattacharya obtained his PhD in English from the University of Hyderabad in 2014. In the same year, he started his teaching career at the Central University of Karnataka, Kalaburagi. From there, he moved to the Central University of Tamil Nadu, Tiruvarur in 2015. Subsequently, he joined the Department of English, University of Hyderabad in 2020, where he currently works as an assistant professor in the Department of English. During his teaching career, he has taught core courses in new literatures in English, Renaissance literature, American literature, and cultural studies. He has also taught elective courses in children's literature and media and the nation. He has published essays and book chapters in the areas of trauma studies, young adult fiction, celebrity culture, and pedagogy of literature. Some of his notable publications are Harry Potter as detective fiction, which was published in the book Critical Thinking, Academic Writing, and Presentation Skills. In the IUP Journal of English Studies, he published an article, The Boy Who Lived to Become the Chosen One. In Radical Thinker, he published Reading Masculinity in Much Ado About Nothing, Notes from an Indian Classroom. On behalf of the staff and students of Department of English, Bishop Iber College, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Bhattacharya. Welcome, sir. We are honored to have you with us today. Dr. Bhattacharya is here to give a talk and share his insights on the topic, locating culture, space, identity, and power. Without further delay, I invite Dr. Bhattacharya to address the gathering. The time is all yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwin, for inviting me to deliver this lecture. And I've been to your college once in person when I was in Tamil Nadu. So it's good to catch up with all of you again, although virtually this time. So I will not spend any more time on introductions, but get straight to the point. What I will do is I will make a PPT presentation and talk alongside. And I'll also use some audiovisual material during my presentation, which I hope if I play on my computer, you all will be able to see and hear. So those are by way of illustrations of the points that I will try to make. So I'll just stop my video so that you can watch my screen. Please let me know if what I'm sharing is visible to all of you. And if at any point there is a technical glitch, please let me know if the slides are not moving or if something has gone off screen. So just do not hesitate to interrupt me and say that there's something wrong with the technical aspect of it. So I'll start now. Let me just share my PPT.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just a moment. Is this visible to everyone?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to look at some basic dimensions of locating culture, and the paradigm that I'm using today, the paradigms rather that I'm using today are space, identity, and power. So we are going to look at some basic ideas. First of all, what is the significance of space in culture? Why are we talking about space at all? Now, we all know that cultural studies actually examines how we make meaning of our everyday experiences of living in society. If you recall your Raymond Williams, he talks about culture as the everyday way of life. He declares that culture is ordinary. So cultural studies is not just about looking at artifacts and objects in museums or art galleries. That is a very narrow, restricted definition of culture that was earlier described as high culture. Cultural studies as an academic discipline, as it has evolved and is being practiced now in colleges and universities, it deals with the everyday contexts of living. So it deals with your food, your clothing, your modes of transport, the forms of communication, the kinds of entertainment that you engage with on an everyday basis. That is basically the raw material, the subject matter for study, for inquiry, for cultural studies scholars and students. So it looks at meaning-making processes and it locates it in the everyday context, usually. And these meanings arise out of interactions and negotiations between individuals and groups. That is through acts of communication. So basically, culture emerges out of various negotiations and interactions between individuals and groups. And these are basically acts of communication in the sense that these are all, through ways of using language, and I use the term language over here in a broad sense of the term, not just French or English or Tamil, but to think about language as being a certain code, a socially accepted code of communication with one another. So language can be cinema, language can be poetry, language can be science and technology also. So each of these domains has its own terms, has its own codes, which makes communication possible. So how meanings arise out of interactions between individuals as well as groups. That is something that cultural studies is interested in looking at. And these communicative acts are guided by codes and norms, which constitute relations of power between individuals and groups. So any communicative act that happens between one person and another person, or a person and a group, or two different groups, that is always coded with power relations. For instance, the fact that I am using my authority as a faculty member at a recognized university in India in order to address you, to take your time and space, means that there is a certain implicit power equation between the speaker and the listener. And this is something that can be said about all acts of communication in society. No act of communication is random or arbitrary. There's always a context of power relation between the people who are communicating with one another. So these relations of power govern how we organize and use space. Reciprocally, the spaces in which our everyday activities unfold determine the cultural values of those activities. So again, to take the example of what we are engaged in right now, this exercise, which is an academic exercise of me speaking about a subject that is predetermined and you listening to that within the framework of a classroom environment, in this case, of course, digitally and technologically enabled. It's a relation of power because we have chosen, both you and I have chosen to organize and use this space and this time, of course, in a very specific way. So the meaning, the value, the significance of this particular exercise, let's say, that we're engaging in at this moment, is then determined also by the time and space within which it is occurring. So if I were to deliver the same lecture, let's say, in a street corner in my locality in Hyderabad, no one is going to listen to this. It will become a meaningless activity. So the fact that this particular act of communication between you and me is taking place right now within this frame of time and space, set within the academic context, that is what makes this particular act meaningful at all, significant at all, which means that the space is not incidental. The space is not a mere backdrop to what is happening right now. If this is part of academic culture, then it requires to be performed within a certain frame of time and place, which is the here and the now in terms of the classroom environment that we are sharing. So we are co-participating in this exercise. So that is one obvious example that I can provide to you to understand how it is that power relations between individuals, groups, and communities are organized through space and in space, and they also make our everyday activities meaningful. So space is not an inert setting, as I just said, it's not some kind of passive background. It is the dynamic fabric through which we make culture. So culture is not a product, but a process of meaning making. It's not something out there. It's not something objective, something that you can hold in your hand. Culture is the meanings, the set of meanings, sometimes meanings that evolve, are contested over, change over a period of time, from one place to another place, from one point of history to another point of history. The meanings of particular activities, particular objects change, and that is what culture means. I move over to the next idea. Is this visible? The second slide, space as a cultural construct.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So if we think about space, why are we talking about space while we talk about culture? Space needs to be understood not as a purely scientific determinate category. What do I mean by this? That yes, there is a physical dimension to space. Of course, we know that from our science textbooks, but it is not enough to think about space only in those specific scientific determinate terms. Space as having certain physical dimensions, length, breadth, density, volume, and so on and so forth. Yes, no one is denying that. But for us to understand space in a socially meaningful way, we must also be willing to define it in terms of the investment of variable cultural meanings in a physical site. So a particular location becomes meaningful when we invest, ascribe, accord it certain kinds of meanings. Then it becomes meaningful space for us. So space becomes subject to construction through discourse. Discourse basically is a pattern of language use repeated over a period of time within a community or a social context that makes certain kinds of meanings. So again, space becomes the subject of construction. So space, yes, there is physical reality, but the meanings of space are something that we co-create, we construct at any given point in history, at any given location within society. The same physical site may have different, sometimes conflictual meanings for different communities. For example, let's say contested religious sites or disputed territories, let's say like Pakistan occupied Kashmir or Jerusalem, the Israel-Palestine fight over this. So if you think about it, then space, territorial or geographical space, or objects within a particular space may have different meanings for different communities. And sometimes communities may even fight, go to war over the different meanings that they ascribe to space. So while the physical dimension, the physical location, the territorial latitude and longitude of Pakistan occupies Kashmir is the same, but the meanings that, let's say, two warring states such as India and Pakistan make out of it, those meanings differ. And the maps also change. The representation of that space then changes, depending on who's doing the representation, whether it's the Indian government drawing the map or the Pakistani government drawing the map. So if you think about it, then we obviously understand that space is not merely definable exclusively or purely in terms of its scientific or physical dimensions. It is also the domain of making meaning, constructing meaning through the investment of value in it. So the provisional meanings that we ascribe to space are a measure of relational power between individuals and groups. So who gets to define the meanings of a particular space then also is determined by what kind of social power, social, political, or cultural, economic power that a particular individual or group exercises, wields in a particular society. So it is not an innocent act of or a random accidental act of investing meaning into certain spaces. It is always to do with who has greater power to define what space is. Identity is defined in terms of how we participate in these power relations through space. So how is it that identity is related to any of this? Okay, we understand that there are different individuals and groups who invest certain kinds of meaning in space, and that is what enables space to become more than just a scientific category. But how is our identity tied up to this? This is something that we will explore in some detail through my presentation. So if identity is defined in terms of how we participate in power relations through space, the obvious example that comes to mind is to look at the university classroom itself. And I'll spend maybe the next 5 or 10 minutes looking at this as an instance. How is it that we can think of the university classroom as a case study or an illustration or an instance of how power equations relations are configured through space? So think of the university classroom as a space that is organized as per prescribed institutional norms or codes. And what are these norms and codes? That there are certain rules and regulations, terms and conditions relating to how both the teacher and the student can use the university classroom as a space. It is not random or arbitrary. You cannot do whatever you want within the classroom, right? So there are certain rules that are prescribed by the institution. And the institution, of course, exists within a larger context of the government, the Ministry of Education, let's say, or the social rules of decorum, of interaction between adults and young children if it's school, or adults and young adults if it's college. So if you think about this, then these codes regulate the physical and behavioral engagement of the members who occupy the space of the classroom. What do we mean by this? That there is a certain kind of regulation in terms of both our physical and behavioral patterns within the space of the classroom that we share. So think of the fact that the physical territory of the classroom itself is demarcated. That in a physical classroom, there is a certain demarcation in terms of how the furniture is laid out in the classroom, in the space of the classroom. What part of the classroom does the teacher occupy versus what part of the classroom the students occupy? The teacher may have the agency, the freedom, the right to move around the classroom while she or he teaches. The students are expected to stay stationary. So how you are able to move around, make your body itself mobile within the space of the classroom is also then determined by whether you are a teacher or a student. So again, it is about the power relations that exist between the two of them. So there is a physical demarcation in terms of the arrangement of furniture itself, the distribution of time within the classroom, who gets to speak. So the speaker may teach, the teacher may speak for, let's say, 50 minutes of a class, and then the remaining 10 or 15 minutes may be devoted to responses, queries from students. If students want to ask questions, they might be asked to raise hands. So there are certain terms and conditions as to how time distribution can also occur within the classroom setting. So we understand then that the space is again organized or regulated in these ways. There is also the arrangement and use of material infrastructure. Who can use the blackboard or the OHP? Not anyone can everyone can do it. So there are again terms and conditions as to the use of actual material objects which are part of the classroom academic infrastructure. Then think of also the fact that the choice of subject matter, the language that is used within the classroom, the clothing, the kinds of clothes a teacher as well as a student may choose to wear, and the physical posture. All of these are codes that we have inculcated culturally and we follow when we occupy the space of the classroom. So the subject matter that I can talk about is prescribed by the syllabus, the curriculum, that I cannot talk about anything and everything that I want to. The language that I use, the tone and the register, I cannot be abusive towards you and you cannot be abusive towards me when we use language to communicate in a classroom environment. Even if I'm trying to discipline students, it has to be done in a particular kind of language. I cannot get personally abusive. Then clothing, what kinds of clothes teachers are expected to wear, what kinds of clothes students are expected to wear. In schools, of course, a lot of students have uniforms, sometimes even in colleges. In some educational institutions, even faculty are expected to wear certain kinds of clothes. So let's say saris for female faculty in certain institutions. Physical posture, I cannot lie down and teach or recline on a couch or a sofa and teach. That would be considered inappropriate behavior. Similarly, you as students cannot then sit cross-legged on your chair. You have to sit in a particular way in order for me to recognize you as students. So then we understand that in all of these little ways that we do not even think about, the space of the classroom, how we occupy and utilize the space of the classroom is determined through the cultural associations or that we have with the act of teaching itself, that the act of teaching has to occur in a particular way. And this particular way is something that we have arrived at a common consensus about. So that is the cultural dimension of academics. When I say culture, I do not necessarily mean poetry or painting or music. Culture would be the everyday practice of life. And this is one everyday practice of life in which teachers and students engage with one another, share the space of the classroom, and co-create this learning activity. So basically, it is by performing these codes of conduct within the space of the classroom that both teachers and students enact their identity. So by adhering to these norms, I am enacting my role as a teacher, and you, by adhering certain norms as pupils, you are enacting your identities as students. So that is how the negotiation with space actually is a performance of all of our respective identities. So such spatial enactment or practice encodes discourses of discipline and modernity. So this is part of the academic discipline, that you're supposed to behave in a certain way, conduct yourself in terms of your body, how you carry your body, how you talk, how you communicate with one another. It feeds into the discourse of discipline and modernity, that this is a modern way of teaching. So we are not following, let's say, a Gurukul system of education in most modern Indian educational systems, with a few exceptions perhaps. So there are certain ideas of discipline and modernity associated with how we conduct ourselves within the space of the university classroom. And these codes, this kind of spatial practice actually affirms the power relation between the teacher and student, both of whom are institutional subjects. So it does not really depend on me as an individual teacher or you as an individual student. The codes will continue to be performed regardless of whether I am teaching or some other faculty members teaching, or whether it's you or your juniors who are studying in the same classroom. So the codes remain the same. So that is how we understand that there is a certain kind of cultural construction of space through which we also perform our identity. All right, we move over to the next idea. And this is modes and media of constructing space. Is this visible, this slide? Modes and media of constructing space?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there are different modes through which we invest meaning in spaces. So first, let us look at the emotional or the sentimental mode. When we invest spaces in, when we invest emotion or sentiment in certain spaces, and this is the narrative construction of space. What does this mean? That there are certain personal or familial associations that we may have with particular spaces. Let's say your ancestral home or village, or that is at the level of the individual or a member of a family, but it can also operate at a collective level when ethnic or community associations occur with certain spaces, such as migrant communities' nostalgic memory of their country of origin. So you might find.
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're not able to see the full screen of the presentation, sir. The last few lines are, it's not visible.
Oh, okay, okay. Let me just check. Is this better now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. So it can happen at an individual level in terms of personal associations with certain spaces, ancestral home or village, but it can also happen at a collective or a community level when, let's say, for instance, migrant communities' nostalgic memory of the country of origin, a place that they have left, they are no longer physically located in, but they still remember, maybe through poetry, through literature, through stories about how lush the vegetation was or how tasty the food was. You will find this, for instance, in a lot of narratives by Bangladeshi refugees who came during the partition to the Indian territory. And they still talk about, in very romanticized terms, about how sweet the water of the rivers was or how big the fish that they ate was over there. So this is an emotional or a sentimental investment of meaning with certain spaces. And this is a narrative construction of space. These are texts that are built around the idea of certain kinds of spaces, even though those spaces may be geographically inaccessible or remote in the here and the now. Then there is also the material or physical dimension of it, how materially or physically we invest certain meanings. And this is the corporeal construct of space. Corporeal meaning referring to the body itself. So ordinary everyday engagements, modes of engagement with spaces of work and leisure. For example, how do I go to office? How do you come to your university or college? What kinds of clothes do you wear at home? Which part of home is most comfortable for you? Which is the most intimate where you would not allow guests in? For instance, your kitchen or your bedroom may be spaces that you would not usually allow your guests to enter, even within that domestic territory. So these ordinary, everyday engagements, forms of engagement with the spaces that we occupy, how we use our bodies to occupy and interact with those spaces, these are ways of corporeal construction of space. We can also think about it again at a collective social level of meaning making, where certain spaces are invested with meaning because they are considered to be sites of national significance. For example, war memorials. So think of all the memorial sites that have been built around Ground Zero, 9/11. Okay, or the formal official burial sites of or cremation sites of our political leaders. So you may have Rajghat, where Gandhiji was cremated, or you have Shakti Sthal, Indira Gandhi's grave, things like that, which become then signs, locations of national importance. We invest certain meanings and make them, render them sacred. We maintain a certain sanctity about how those spaces are maintained, who enters, what can be done in those kinds of spaces. So these are collective social meaning-making processes also, through which we mark certain territories as of community or national importance. So there is a spatial concretization of the abstract idea of the nation in this particular case. So spaces of national importance. And then there is a third, perhaps the most interesting and potentially most meaningful way of doing investing meaning with space, and that is the imaginative mode, the prospective speculative construction of space. Space is constructed not on the basis of past history or present experience, but in anticipation of future encounters. So what do I mean by this? That these meaning-making ways which involve the imagination do not necessarily rely on your actual physical encounter either in the past with a particular place. So not about having lived in a particular country and then left it behind and feeling nostalgic about it. So not that kind of a past association that is based on your experience of having lived in a particular place, and not also on, it is also not dependent on your present experience, like going to office or coming back home, having guests over or friends over for dinner at home. Not those kinds of everyday experiences either, which are located in the present, but these are prospective, looking forward into the future, speculative. And these anticipate future encounters. For example, blueprints of residential properties. You go to websites, real estate websites such as 99 Acres or Magic Bricks, which give you information about, let's say, housing complexes, apartment complexes that are coming up in big cities. And they allow you to take a virtual tour. They give you a blueprint of a 3 BHK. What is the layout? How many square feet is a particular room going to be? What are the amenities outside? They will also give you images, computer generated, artificial intelligence generated images of these spaces that you may want to invest money in and occupy, right? So these are targeted towards future consumption and occupation of space. These are not spaces that have yet come into existence in physical terms. The blueprint of a residential property that has not yet been built, it is in the process of being built. So in that case, this is a speculative, prospective, imaginative construction of space. You're investing meaning into this in advance, in anticipation of what it would become. So it's an image of what it may become that you are consuming. Maps of international waters and airspaces are other examples of this. Think of the fact that in the Southern Ocean, where MH370, that Malaysian Airlines that disappeared 10 years ago, is supposed to have crashed. It's international waters, yes, but we do not really have any sense of what that place is like, that is stormy oceans. And yet we have, if you look at the political map of the world, you have a kind of a demarcation maps, lines drawn on the map, that this is Australian territory, this is the territory of Malaysia, this is the territory of Indonesia. So when you draw those lines on oceans that are very choppy, which are practically inhabitable, they have no real value for human beings in terms of habitation. What does it mean then to draw those kinds of maps, let's say in international waters or airspaces, or even of blueprints of settlements on Mars, on other planets, which we have not yet set foot on? To have those kinds of ideas then of territorializing spaces that have not yet been captured or that have not yet come into existence, it is a form of prospective, speculative, imaginative investment of meaning in those spaces. So these are the different modes through which meaning is also invested. Emotional, material, and imaginative meaning is invested in certain kinds of spaces. Now, I want you people to look at this carefully. This is actually an image from the Incredible India campaign from the 2010s, if I remember correctly. And this is an iconic image, of course, of the Taj Mahal in black and white in this particular case. And we see that the caption is quite interesting. Just a moment. Yeah. And to think these days, men get away with giving flowers and chocolates to their wives. Is this visible to everybody?
Text is too small, sir.
Oh, okay. Let me try and expand this. Can you see this now, the text?
Yes, sir, it is clear.
Yeah. And to think these days, men get away with giving flowers and chocolates to their wives. Now, what does this particular image do? It constructs the idea of India as a tourist destination by using an iconic architectural sign, that of the Taj Mahal, that not only that is recognizable, not only.
Sir, slide share is not on.
Oh, okay.
Slideshow. Sorry, sir. Slideshow.
Yeah. Can you see this now?
Oh, sir, it's not clear.
Can you see the image or can you not see the caption?
Excuse me, sir. Sir, it will be better if you could on this slide share, sir, slideshow. It is in the bottom of the screen. It is in the bottom of the screen next to the the place where you zoom in and zoom out. The icon next to it, to your left side, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is this better? Can you see it now?
No, sir. There is no transition yet, sir.
Oh. Let me just stop sharing and reshare. Maybe that will help. Is it visible now?
The screen is visible, sir. But
Okay.
okay, sir. Sure, sir. We can continue. Yes, sir. We can continue, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Sorry about this. So the reason why I'm looking at this is to think about space, identity, and belonging. How is it that we define ourselves, let's say, as a community, in this particular case, a national community, we as Indians, in terms of space? Now, this is an advertisement text, a media text that is meant to attract tourists from not just within the country, from abroad as well. And the way that it does is use an iconic image of a monument that is recognized both nationally and internationally. And it comes with a particular caption. And to think these days, men get away with giving flowers and chocolates to their wives. So it is meant to be funny, humorous, witty, because it, in some senses, provokes people into thinking about the cultural heritage of India, where romance would mean a Shah Jahan building a monument over 22 years after the death of his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, right? So if you think about this, it is in some senses geared towards generating revenue through the tourism industry by attracting more tourists, using the space of India through an iconic image that this is the territory of India, but this is not empty territory. This is a culturally rich territory that has a long history, a long legacy of architectural wonder in this particular case, let's say. And there's also the discourse of romance, that what is it then, what romance means now as opposed to what romance meant earlier in the Indian cultural heritage, let's say, or in that tradition. So it is, of course, geared towards the very commercial enterprise of generating revenue through tourism. But it also constructs an identity of who we are as Indians, what is the legacy that we bear, and what does that legacy mean at this moment in 21st century India. So it then asserts the continuity of India's cultural heritage into the 21st century, and it also then gives it a repackaged, remodeled form as something that is valuable in terms of in terms of the tourism industry within a globalized context, where the Taj Mahal is actually something that could attract potentially visitors not just from within the territory of India, but also from other parts of the world. So in that sense, then we see that there is a spatial construction of national identity. Nation as having a cultural lineage, but nation also as geared to the challenges and the requirements of the globalized economic order, where you see tourism as one important source of revenue. Okay, so we move over to the next slide. Is this visible? Space as the product of power relations. Okay. So we look at certain dimensions of access and mobility when we talk about space. And again, this is to do with power, because it is your social power that will determine what degree of access you have to particular spaces and what degree of mobility you enjoy within that space. Remember, I spoke about a little while back of the fact that I, as a teacher, can be more mobile physically within the classroom than my students can be. So mobility is also determined. It's a function of the amount of power, social power that you have, that you hold, and that you can exercise within any spatial context. So access and mobility are two important dimensions through which actually operate within and across space and are socially sanctioned, regulated, monitored, and negotiated. So these forms of spatial organization encode relations of class, caste, gender, age, and religion. What do we mean by this? That your access to particular public spaces, let's say shopping malls, is not free or without terms and conditions. It is to do with whether you belong to a particular class. Have we ever seen beggars inside a shopping mall? No, which means that it is a class restricted point of entry. Although there may not be actual notices put up that beggars are not allowed, it is an unspoken understanding that unless you wear certain kinds of clothes, unless you appear physically to belong to a particular class, you will not be admitted into the precincts of a shopping mall. So this goes without actually stating it outright. It's a common consensus. Gated residential complexes, again, you won't find beggars over there. Sites of worship, so people belonging to a particular gender or a particular religion may not be allowed to enter certain religious precincts. Think of the Shabarimala controversy, where there may be a legal dimension, a legal definition of who can and cannot access a particular site of worship, and then there is a religious definition of it, and these two may actually come into conflict. So we have an understanding of how access to and mobility within spaces is again coded in terms of class, caste, gender. Caste, of course, is an extremely important determinant when we think about access to certain spaces. And at this point, I would like for you to look at a very short clip that I will play. I hope this will be visible to everybody. Just a moment. Is this visible to all?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. No, sir, it's not visible.
No, I'm trying to play a short video clip. Is this visible to all?
No, sir, no.
Okay, I'm playing a video on YouTube. How do I share this? Okay, share.
Yes, sir.
Is,
Now it's visible.
okay, all right. So just to give you a two-line context for this, some of you may be familiar with this. This is a film called Sairat, a Marathi film that deals with, it's a quintessential Romeo and Juliet story set in an Indian context, rural Maharashtra, and part of it is set in Hyderabad actually. And it's about honor killings and caste atrocities. And it's a love story, which again, you know Romeo and Juliet, so you will know this. But the setting is to do also with caste and caste dynamics within a particular village in Tamil Nadu, sorry, in Maharashtra. And the thing is, the male protagonist over here, the hero, belongs to a lower caste. The female protagonist, the heroine, whom we will see, encountering one another within the premises of their college that both of them go to. They're high school or college students. So she has a massive crush on this guy, and we see how her degree of access to the space of the village and the classroom is determined by the fact that she belongs to an upper caste. She belongs to the wealthiest family in the village, and she also belongs to the upper caste. So both in terms of class and in terms of caste, she has an upper hand over this guy. In terms of gender, of course, in patriarchy, women have a subordinate position. But in terms of class and caste, here this female character, the heroine, has a greater access to and mobility within space. And we will see that this is something that is reflected very well in this short clip that I will play.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. It is not audible, sir. We could not hear the audio.
Oh, okay. I do not exactly know how to make the audio available to you as well. Does anyone know how to do this? The audio. Okay, even if the audio is not visible, I want you to focus on the visuals, if that is fine. Sure. It's a sort of a love song that goes on.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. So the point will still make sense even without the audio. Hello. So, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, but the screen is not visible, sir.
Yeah. I'll share the screen now. So I hope you were able to at least figure out the power dynamic between these two characters from the visuals themselves. You see that how this particular character occupies space, the heroine over here. She obviously has an upper hand because of the fact that she belongs to an upper class, upper caste background, as opposed to this boy who belongs to the lower class. In fact, she has an upper hand even over the teacher because the teacher happens to belong to a Dalit community. So in this particular case, while the context is romantic infatuation between these two young people, we understand that the power dynamic between the two of them is negotiated through the different ways in which they occupy space and they enjoy mobility within that space. So she obviously has more mobility, not just in terms of having a mode of transport. She has a scooty, and in other sequences in the film, you see that she actually comes to college riding a Harley Davidson. She actually has a big motorbike. So she has economic resources as well as the social capital in terms of upper caste then to have that degree of mobility that he does not enjoy, which is why the power equation is also reversed in terms of the fact that she's the one who's staring at him rather than him staring at her. So we see that there is a tweaking of the traditional gender equation also within the patriarchal setup that we see over here. So we understand that the space of the university or the college or the classroom is something that is then also coded in terms of caste and class identities. That this occupation of the space, the fact that she can disregard even a teacher's silent admonition, is something that is to do with the fact that she has greater social mileage and privilege in terms of a superior class and caste position. So we understand, therefore, that spatial organization encodes these kinds of relations. Think of another very common example, and that would be the discourses of safety and modesty that inform the occupation and utilization of public spaces by female citizens in India. Since we were just talking about mobility, access, and gender in public spaces, let's think about how many women we actually see hanging around in pawn shops, roadside eateries, playgrounds, and street corners. If you think about this, it is almost predominantly a male domain. When you think of roadside eateries, which are not considered to be safe enough, maybe after a certain point of time during the day, for women to hang around unescorted. So these become coded in terms of gender. We also have in terms of whether we also have think of space in terms of whether certain kinds of communities are visible in public spaces. And for this, let's take the instance of the invisibility of certain categories of citizens in specific spaces as a function of their subordinate social status. Think of the stark spatial visibility of migrant workers during the first COVID lockdown in India. Then all the spaces were completely empty. These migrant workers became uh, in some senses, visible in media representations also. And they pose a civic, political, and humanitarian crisis to the idea of the democratic nation. Then what is it that these people who otherwise are neglected, who are always on the fringes of the modern Indian city, these migrant workers, suddenly they become hyper visible because there's nobody else on the street. And what does it then mean for them to be precariously, unsafely be present on the streets of India, walking for miles? What does that mean then for the nation as a democratic space itself? Is it really democratic in that case if some people are forced to walk down 1,200 miles to their home? Restrictions also on the entry of courier agents, let's say delivery boys, domestic help into private apartments. And this is something that you will find in gated communities in bigger cities. Sometimes there are separate elevators for domestic help, for maid servants and service boys. So not to be, those are separate from the ones that the residents themselves use. So again, there is a segregation of space within gated communities. Domestic help were restricted from entering, courier agents were restricted from entering residential apartments, university campuses during the lockdown. So again, we understand that scientifically speaking, if you are thinking about the pandemic and the restrictions that lockdown made necessary, scientifically, it is not true that an Amazon delivery guy would have a greater chance of transmitting the virus than a faculty member teaching at the University of Hyderabad. The virus does not make those kinds of distinctions, but access to certain kinds of spaces then becomes regulated, differentially monitored in terms of your profession, your class, your caste, your social currency, so to speak. So access and mobility are important dimensions of identity also. The fact that one may have greater social capital in terms of class and caste position, in terms of profession, and therefore be able to access and be mobile within certain spaces than other people, is again pointing to the social construction of space itself, and that is coded in terms of power relations. Okay, now we move over to another image, and this is something that many of you might be familiar with. Since we are talking about power relations and politics, let's look at space as a domain of power politics. This is a controversial cartoon that was published in the New York Times after India successfully launched its Mars mission, Mangalyaan. So if you look at it, this cartoon, which of course drew a lot of criticism and flack, I hope this is visible to everybody.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So this represents a segregation of spaces. So there is a particular clubhouse maybe, which is called the Elite Space Club. And they're reading the members of this. Of course, these kinds of country clubs have a subscription policy. So only subscribing members can enter it. Not anyone and everyone can walk in through its doors. And they're reading about India's Mars mission. If you look at it carefully, the newspaper that this old gentleman is holding has a report on India's Mars mission. And there's somebody outside, an Indian obviously wearing a turban, who's standing there with what looks like a cow. Okay, or it could be a bull also. And it says India, and it's knocking at the gates, at the door. So we see here there is a segregation of space that immediately reminds us of, dogs not allowed, that kind of colonial or apartheid-like distinction, demarcation of spaces that we experienced during the colonial regime. But this is not colonial period, right? This is in the 21st century. And we still see that there is a certain kind of segregation of space, which is being used as a metaphor for that kind of elitism, that kind of inherent racism that makes the Western media mock India's success story when it comes to outer space exploration. So we see that those kinds of prejudices that are almost like a hangover from the colonial period, those racist undertones, are made visible here through using space as a metaphor. In this particular case, then there is segregation in the visual frame itself. The space occupied by these people who are the elites, and then there is a post-colonial native who's actually knocking at the gate, wanting to gain access. And his primitivism, of course, is then being mocked because he's holding a cow. So this is again indicative of the primitivism of the native, of the post-colonial subject, as opposed to the sophistication of the Western European man. So we see that this is, of course, a racist discourse, and this was therefore quite rightly criticized heavily in the media itself. So again, the idea of racial difference, of superiority, racial snobbery is something that is established discursively through the use of space within this pictorial frame. Another instance, and this is again another example, an image from the Incredible India campaign. Let me see if I can make this slightly more visible for you. Just a moment. Is this more visible now?
It is visible, sir, but the text is too small. Text size.
Okay. Okay. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'll just read out the text. This is an image of the Royal Bengal tiger, and the text says, "Not all Indians are polite, hospitable, and vegetarian." Now think about what this kind of caption does. It is about the cultural stereotype that the West has of India, that Indians are polite, they're hospitable, they're very willing and submissive, the whole Atiti Devo Bhava kind of idea. And they're predominantly vegetarian, which of course we know is not accurate or factually true. So this is an Indian, but this is a non-human Indian. It's an animal that's Indian. It's a Royal Bengal tiger. Again, another iconic creature that lives in the Indian landscape. So it's, in some senses, it constructs India not through technology, not through human habitants of India, but in this particular case, through the flora and fauna of India. The natural diversity, the biodiversity of India is what is used as the image, the sign to construct India as a cultural space. And this space, again, is something, of course, because this is part of the Incredible India campaign, it's an advertisement text. It then promotes visitors to come visit India, look at, bear witness to this incredible biodiversity that we have to offer. Of course, this will hopefully generate economic profit revenue for the tourism industry, but it also then does something more. It is not just about making money by getting tourists into our country. It is also then revising the stereotype, the cultural discourse of India being, a primarily docile, polite, hospitable vegetarian country. It is in some sense revising the Western image of India, the Western stereotype of India. So this again ties in with the larger political stance that India assumes in the 21st century, where India is no longer non-aligned, no longer, a gentle player. It becomes more aggressive, more assertive in the domain of global politics. And the spatial construction of India as one that is not necessarily always hospitable, not always polite. Obviously, the Royal Bengal tiger will not be polite towards you, will not be hospitable, will not ask you to come and have a meal with you. It will probably make you a meal, right? So it is not vegetarian in that sense. So this is then the use of space, India's natural landscape, its biodiversity, being used in order to redefine the image of India for Western media. So we see that this is another way in which cultural stereotypes can be revised, utilized, mocked within media texts themselves. Now we look at certain related ideas. If we think of space as being contested territory, space can be defined and redefined. Space can use cultural stereotypes, such as the New York Times cartoon about India's Mars mission, symptomized, or it can also be used, space can also be used in media in order to redefine certain cultural stereotypes. This would prompt us to then think about a little more in some more detail about the processes of appropriation, subversion, and resistance within space. So what do we mean by this? That deliberate use of space in ways that evade, revise, or counter the institutional, social, or administrative meanings it bears is possible. That one can, either an individual or very commonly groups of individuals can use space in ways that go against, that counter, not necessarily by way of direct challenge, but sometimes just by evading or revising the prescribed norms, the institutional or social or administrative norms of making meaning out of it. For example, student protests on university campuses. Now, the campus is meant to be, in some senses, keep students in a certain position of subordinate power, but student protests, as we know, erupt in various university and college campuses, and that is then appropriation of that particular territory, that space, for the declaration of their own democratic rights to protest within the campus itself. Think of larger instances, popular resistance movements, civil resistance movements, such as the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the candlelight vigils that were organized at India Gate in New Delhi after the Nirbhaya rape incident. All of those then indicate that the sanctioned administrative or institutional uses of space do not always are not always adhered to, that people, communities, groups of people can rally together and deliberately, intentionally use spaces in ways that are not prescribed, that were not originally intended for it. So this occupation of public spaces in order to protest against certain kinds of political or administrative policies is something that indicates that space can also be used as a means of social resistance. Then there is also the utilization of public spaces, there's a typo, in ways, not by ways, in ways that do not generate economic profit for owners of capitalist establishments. So think of unemployed youth in shopping malls. While many consumers, young men and women, may actually enter the shopping mall without having any desire, intention of making a purchase, not actually buying anything, but simply going there, hanging out there for a few hours, enjoying the sights and the sounds and the air-conditioned environment over there. In which case then, the entry of this youth, the occupation of the space of the shopping mall by the unemployed youth does not generate any economic profit, any revenue for the shops, the retailers, the corporate shop owners over there. But this space is then nevertheless being used for entertainment, for a value that accrues to the consumer. In this particular case, the consumer is consuming the experience of being inside a shopping mall, not necessarily buying products. So it's a different form of non-economic consumption, let's say. So the space is being utilized in ways that are not intended. And this cannot be controlled then, because you have to let everyone in, because everyone is potentially a consumer. Space, therefore, is not only a site of consumption, but also the object of consumption. What happens when somebody enters a shopping mall, spends a few hours, and steps out without making a single purchase? In that case, then, space is not only the site of consumption. So the shopping mall does not only become the physical location of consumption, it actually becomes the object of consumption. What you have consumed by spending those many hours at the shopping mall without actually buying any single object is that you've consumed the experience of the shopping mall. So the shopping mall no longer remains a site, it actually becomes an object that you consume. So space becomes subject to consumption itself. The experience of hanging out as a shopping mall is as fulfilling, therefore, as the actual purchase of products itself. Then there is also the occupation of public spaces by subaltern or marginal subjects. For example, think about beggars outside a temple. So beggars not inside the shopping mall because that is not permissible, but beggars outside a temple or any place of worship. Of course, because that is strategic location. Think of the fact that people who have just had a conversation with God or a prayer directed to God may be in a more charitable mood, if only to appear more godly, right? So then they have a better chance of getting alms. And therefore the beggars you will see, especially in India, hanging around outside temples and mosques. Peddlers of fake brands at seaports or docks, where you can buy a fake Gucci or a fake Prada bag for 1/10 of the price, let's say at a port or a dock, where these kinds of fake brands are smuggled in. So we see that space also becomes subject to certain kinds of appropriation and subversion, that these are not spaces that are originally meant for these kinds of activities, but they get used, they get utilized in some senses by people who are not necessarily contributing to the economic dimension of the construction of these kinds of spaces. More obvious examples of space being the theater where protest is performed, space being the arena of the performance of protest, will come from political protests. For example, look at these two images over here. I hope this is visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the image on the left-hand side, for those of you who are familiar with Margaret Atwood's dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale, and the Hulu series, the TV series that is made out of it, the 5-season series now. These are the costumes that those handmaids wear in in the story and in the series, right? The red costumes, who are then being exploited as sex slaves, basically, in this dystopian setting called Gilead, right? So this is not actually a scene from the TV show itself. These are actual people who went on protest after the cuts, the funding cuts were made in the US Parliament for Planned Parenthood, and women started protesting against the infringement of their reproductive rights when abortion laws were being passed, repealed, where abortion was being made illegal one after the other state in the USA. These were protesters actually donning on the costumes of sex slaves who are basically fictional characters in a fictional textbook or a fictional TV series. But this becomes then a form of occupation of space. If you look at the backdrop, this is the capital of in Washington, D.C. This is the parliament where they make these kinds of policy decisions. And these women are then protesting as part of their democratic right to protest in this very space itself, where these kinds of repressive anti-women rules are being made. They are protesting by using their own bodies as instruments and putting on clothes that have become almost iconic in the popular culture of America. So they're occupying space and they're using it almost as a theatrical setting for performing a certain kind of protest that makes meaning to people who are familiar with what is happening inside the building and who are also familiar with the significance of this particular costume itself. In that sense, then protest is also staged or performed as a spectacle to be witnessed. And this happens, of course, through the occupation, the utilization of these kinds of public spaces. Look at the image on the right-hand side. This is graffiti. Okay, this is not a protest really, but there is a certain amount of rebellion, a certain amount of questioning of the norms of society implicit in this. You have a parking lot in which the ing have been deliberately not entirely removed, but smudged over, right? And somebody has drawn the image, if you can see this well, the image of a little girl hanging on a swing. So if you remove the ing, parking, the parking lot, which is occupied only by automobiles, which of course, emit a lot of greenhouse gases, warming up our climate, leading to global change, climate catastrophe. All of these, of course, automobiles are responsible for this in a huge way. So this deliberate defacement of the lettering, parking, this is a public space, right? It looks like a parking lot meant for everybody. It is not exclusive or reserved. The removal of ing and the addition of one particular element, this tiny image of a girl swinging off a swing, which then says that you should have a park here rather than a parking lot. So more trees, more vegetation, fewer automobiles. It then becomes a statement, a reappropriation of this particular public space and a reinscription of meaning It's a way of protesting against the way we humans are living, and which is, of course, bringing us to the brink of climate catastrophe. So again, this becomes a form of using space in order to make a political statement. We look at some final ideas, and that is the relation between space, modernity, and urbanism. So the spatial organization of modern cities revises older relations and generates newer ones. So think, for example, in traditional, colonial India or maybe pre-colonial India, where caste restrictions in terms of who can eat where and which people you should not share food with, those kinds of restrictions can no longer be adhered to in an urban setting when you have common sites of eating. So when you're going into a public restaurant or a roadside eatery, you're not going to be able to maintain this kind of distinction, which is of course casteism and relating to untouchability. You cannot maintain those kinds of distinctions about who eats at the next table with you or what kinds of utensils you want to eat from. So the process of modernization and urbanization necessarily revises certain kinds of social relations, because it revises the ways in which public spaces are structured, ordered. So there are certain common sites where class and caste associations do not matter so much. What matters is whether you have the ability to pay. And think also of something which is of immediate relevance perhaps to young people who live in big cities and towns in India, where there are differential tenancy rules for men and women, married people and single people. So if you try to find a house, let's say, to rent as a tenant in a city like Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai, you'll find that some some house owners will insist that they will only let out houses to families. Some others will say that no, bachelors won't be allowed to rent. Now, this is not to do with whether or not the bachelor will pay 15,000 rupees or a family will pay 15,000 rupees. The 15,000 rupees is the same, whether it comes from a bachelor's pocket or a married couple's pocket, right? But the idea is then spaces are regulated in terms of also your marital status. The idea that some kinds of people will create more trouble than others as tenants. So we see that access to space, modern spaces, especially in Indian cities and towns, is also something that is not evenly distributed. It is also differential. For women, very often actually find it even harder to find tenants willing to give them, especially if there are single women living over there. People prefer married women to occupy their places. So then again, there is the patriarchal discourse of modesty and femininity associated with how tenancy actually works out in practical terms in big Indian cities. So there is also the confusion, the literal mixing together of spatial domains in modern cities. So think of the fact that diverse activities such as shopping, eating, entertainment, travel are brought together in the site of the shopping mall or the international airport. If you think of the space of the shopping mall or the international airport as being representative spaces of the globalized Indian city, these sites then actually combine, collapse these different kinds of activities together. That is the literal meaning of confusion, bringing two disparate things together, confusing them. So shopping, eating, entertainment, movie theaters within the same shopping mall, travel, all of these things are brought together in the site of the shopping mall or the international airport. The international airport, of course, is a transit area, but if you have, let's say, a couple of hours to kill, you might actually go to different shops and they look exactly like a shopping mall. So there's very little difference in terms of architectural layout. So you also have the idea that this constitutes a compression of the cityscape, into a safe, glamorized, sanitized version. So in some senses, this is a microcosm of the city, but it is of course rendered safe. There is no pollution inside. There's no chaotic traffic inside. It is a more glamorized, sanitized version. It is air conditioned, so there is regulation of temperature. So it is a version of the city, but it is a safer, more palatable version of the city that this space of the shopping mall or the international airport creates. There are exclusive spaces also, such as rejuvenation camps, your Ayurveda or naturopathy or yoga camp, detoxifying for a couple of weeks maybe, which are created in order to offer a break from the overload of experience of urban life. And this, of course, is affordable only to those who can pay a hefty sum of money for it. So these are new age discourses of going back to nature, reconnecting with yourself, this new version of naturalism or spiritualism. These are part of a holistic lifestyle. So the spaces you occupy or you have access to, these kinds of Ayurveda or rejuvenation camps, of course, it is not accessible to everyone freely. It is only accessible to an elite minority, because these are inscribed also spatially as exclusive domains. So, and these then offer you the possibility, the promise of being able to reconnect with yourself, detoxify your system. So you will not use your mobile phones or any kind of internet communication. You will only eat organic food. You will live in a very green, lush environment. Those kinds of experiences that are given to you in these earmarked spaces, of course, are elite spaces. They come for a certain price. So it becomes an industry. Again, offering a break from the ordinary space of urban dwelling that you occupy commonly. Finally, we look at dimensions of space, technology, and globalization. And this is the last bit, I promise. I'll stop after this. So space, technology, and globalization. Culture becomes a category that is defined and marketed and consumed as images of spaces circulating in popular media. Think of those two incredible India images, advertisements that we looked at. These are examples of how culture itself is also marketed and consumed as images. So the space is not just the territorial space, space also becomes subject to media representation. So travel and tourism TV channels and websites actually constantly bombard us with images of places that we have never been to, but they sort of prompt a desire to consume those places. Maybe you will feel, enthused enough to, let's say, visit a beach in Sri Lanka or go to Nepal, whichever place that you find most appealing. In the way in which it is packaged, it is sold to you through media images, through these kinds of portals, travel and tourism TV channels. Lifestyle magazines actually bombard us with images of other spaces. So natural diversity, cultural exoticism in terms of delivered to you in terms of the diversity of food and clothing. So think of all of those images that we are constantly consuming. By default, then we are all consumers in a globalized context. Even if you have not been to any other country, you are by default a consumer of those kinds of spaces because you are aware through your exposure of these other cultures that exist in the world. So this is a form of global cosmopolitanism of the consumer, and it's defined in terms of familiarity with other spaces rendered via popular media. Think also of how technology makes us global citizens by enabling virtual access to spaces of historical and political significance. So you in India can actually visit a 9/11 memorial site online. You can undertake virtual tours of Holocaust concentration camps. You can engage in new forms of digital devotion by doing an online darshan of the Siddhivinayak temple, for example. Or if you happen to know any Bengali friends, they will tell you that even if you're not in Calcutta during the Durga Puja festival, you have websites that now give you access to each and every puja mandapam, or pandal as it is called in the northern parts of the country. And you can take a 360-degree tour of the pandal without actually encountering the heat and the noise and the crowd and the sweat of the Calcutta weather. Kolkata, sorry. So you can actually take a digital tour of this particular site, experience the culture. Maybe if you are a Bengali who is now living in Bangalore, feeling homesick during Durga Puja, you can undertake that kind of a tour and partake of that culture spatially, except that this spatial engagement with the culture of the city is enabled through technology, through digital technology. So we see that technology then also makes it possible for us to experience space, not necessarily through geographical, physical contact, through territorial location, but through the means of virtually experiencing other spaces. And this is perhaps the direction in which we can think about how space can be discussed in the broader rubric or within the broader rubric of cultural studies. So that's some of the basic ideas that I wanted to discuss with you guys. So now I would like for you to make any comments, questions, if you have any, share any insights that you might have with the rest of the audience. Thank you for bearing with me, despite all the technical glitches.
Thank you, sir. Now the floor is open for questions and interaction.
Good morning, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is the visibility of spaces purely dependent on their political or economic engagement?
No, political and economic value or currency are just some of the factors, not all of it. Can you give me an example to make this a little more clear? What is it exactly that you have in mind?
In certain movies, certain spaces are deliberately shown. Is there any political reason behind it? Always. Do you think?
I'll give you an example that I hope is familiar to all of you. Everybody is familiar with Mani Ratnam's Roja, although this was released before you guys were born, but you might have seen the film, right? If you remember that particular sequence where Roja's character, her husband is called Rishi Kumar, right? Arvind Swami's character, right? When he first takes her to Kashmir, he literally opens her eyes like this to the mighty Himalayas. That's the first time she's encountering India that is beyond her limited, restricted domain of the small countryside village that she comes from, or even Chennai. She lives for a couple of weeks, I think, in Chennai before she goes to Kashmir with her husband, a newly wedded husband, right? So in that case, the space of Kashmir and Roja's first encounter with Kashmir also becomes for the audience an encounter with the idea of India that is bigger than your local context. It is in some sense an expansion, an extension of the idea of the nation itself. So when Roja's eyes are literally and metaphorically opened to this new domain that she never knew existed, that she had never encountered, we also, as audience members, encounter the sense that India as a nation has a vast natural landscape, and it is in some senses bigger than Roja's limited reality would have familiarized her with. It is also a political move in that sense, because Roja will have to confront that her own limited interests are to be subsumed under the larger interests of the nation, that she cannot only think about the safety of her husband when he's abducted, she also has to think about this larger territory that she has started to discover now. So in that sense, it anticipates Roja's becoming a citizen, that as she also becomes familiar with the territory of India, she also has to grow up. You know, in some senses, it's also a growing up narrative from being a naive girl to becoming a citizen and an adult woman who belongs to the country. So in that sense, then, the representation of space, the expansion of space, Roja initially sings about, in that song, Chinne Chinne Aase, that she wants to encompass the whole world in the braids of her hair. That is a very romantic, idealistic, utopian sort of a sense. As opposed to that, she has to recognize that India is a demarcated territory. And for that, to maintain the sanctity of that territory, citizens have to make certain kinds of sacrifices, even if those sacrifices are unpalatable to her. So in that sense, Roja's education also comes via the means of her spatial education, that she becomes located in bigger and bigger spaces, spaces that are precarious, spaces that she does not understand, spaces that she has never encountered before, but must actually get to know about. What is the space of Kashmir then? What does it mean for India itself? So in that sense, we see that the visibility of certain kinds of spaces does become politically loaded. This is just one example that I could think of by way of a response to this question. I hope that has made sense.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Your thoughts on how space, identity, and power shape or construct the culture. Your illustrations and example made the session more interesting and full of life, and it had opened a new arena of knowledge for us, sir. Thank you so much for your vibrant presence.
Thank you so much. And I hope you people continue to learn and engage with newer topics within the discipline, the broad discipline of English studies. So good to see all of you. Thank you. And thank you, Edwin sir, for hosting me. Apologies for the technical glitches.
No issue, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thankfulness is the beginning of gratitude. Gratitude is the completion of thankfulness. Now, may I call upon Ms. Girija of 2nd MA English to propose the vote of thanks.
When life is sweet, say thank you and celebrate. And when life is bitter, say thank you and grow. Since no duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks, on behalf of the organizing team, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks for this event. First and foremost, I would like to thank our respected principal, sir, Dr. D. Paul Dayabaran in absentia for his immense support, which led this event to a great success. I wholeheartedly thank our Vice Principal aided, Mr. Aragappa Moses and Dr. Satya Seelan, Vice Principal Self-Finance Section in absentia, for their guidance in organizing the event. I would like to thank our Head of the Department and Dean of Arts, Dr. S. Shobana in absentia, who paved way for such a fruitful session. A special thanks to our resource person, Dr. Mary Gabriel, Assistant Professor of English of Axelam College, Vellore, and Dr. Saradindu Bhattacharya, Assistant Professor of English, University of Hyderabad, who shared their findings and ideas with us and turned our ordinary thoughts into extraordinary ones. I take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to Dr. Suresh Frederick, UG Head Department of English and Dean of Research and Development, and Dr. C. Dhanapal Sir, Coordinator of Shift 2 and Dean of Placement and Training. They remain as a great inspiration to all of us. I thank the organizers of this value-added course, Dr. G. Parvati, Associate Dean of Project, and Dr. S.P. Ruth Rajati, Assistant Professor, the class teachers of 2nd MA English, and Mr. J. Edwin Moses, Assistant Professor of English, Academic Counselor of IGNO Study Center, and the team of organizers for their planning and execution. Heartfelt thanks to all the faculty members, all the students of 2nd MA for their valuable contribution in taking this event to greater heights. I thank the technical team who helped us to stay connected throughout the completion of the course. Thank you, technical team. And a warm thanks to all the students who participated in this value-added course with enthusiasm and patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Girija. Let us all rise up for national anthem.